Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another educational offering by the Kansas Association of Counties. I'm Bruce Clydney, the Executive Director for the KAC, and it's great to see all of you who have already joined us and those that are continuing to click on. I think you're in for a good presentation today. Myself and Jay Hall and Kim Qualls and the rest of the KAC staff have been working hard to try to keep everybody up to date, keep our membership up to date of what's going on, and be responsive to your needs and some of the issues that you're continuing to battle. And so this is one of those opportunities that we're taking to maybe help do that. So a big shout out to Brian Stone, who's the Cowley County Emergency Management Director, who actually invited myself and Kim Qualls in the office to participate in this presentation last week that they put on in Cowley County. And I was very impressed, and Kim and I both agreed that this would be a great opportunity for us to share this with our membership, because I think there's a lot of great information in here about the FEMA PA program, and it's very simply laid out, and Christina does a great job of talking about the nuts and the bolts, and she's very anxious to work with all of us through and help us get us through this very rough time that we're experiencing. So a little bit about today's program, a little bit about what's going on. As you well know, that a couple of weeks ago, the KAC sent out an email to many of you folks, and we did hear back a little bit, but not a whole lot. The question was, how much money have you currently spent to date on the coronavirus pandemic battle? And we heard back from a few of you. We had some questions from a few of you, and I want to put this out there again. We need your numbers. We need your statistics. We need your dollar amounts that you've spent, because that is the only way that we're going to be able to push at the state level to hopefully recoup some of these expenditures, both at the state level, like I said, and then also potentially at the federal level. As you may or may not know, there's been a fairly sizable chunk of money that has been brought down from the federal level to the state level. It's up to the tune of about $1.125 billion, and it's to be used on the coronavirus pandemic battle. And to date, we have not been very successful in getting a share of that money for the counties to reimburse their costs. And so we're really wanting to do that. And in order to do that, we need to have statistics, we need to have numbers, we need to be able to prove that counties are incurring some expenditures, some costs, and that way we can propose those expenditures to the governor. With that said, another avenue that I think a lot of folks are pursuing in terms of getting some of those dollars recouped is through this FEMA PA program that Christine is going to talk about here in just a few moments. And so that's a very viable, a very good option as well. And she's going to kind of do a little bit of comparison between that coronavirus, the CARES Act federal dollars, and the FEMA PA program, because there are some similarities and there are some differences. Both dollars will pay for a lot of the same stuff, but some of those dollars can be used differently. And I think Christina does a great job of summarizing and comparing those. So with that said, the other piece of the battle that we're still continuing to fight, and we certainly do ask for your support, is at the federal level. They are, in fact, right now working on a CARES Act 2.0. So hopefully that CARES Act 2.0 will actually have dollars in it for local county governments to help recoup their cost and or also help to make up some of the losses in revenue that you folks are all going to be experiencing. So that battle is being fought right now at the federal level. Our partners with the National Association of Counties is doing a fantastic job of keeping us informed, and we're trying to do the same to keep you folks informed about what's going on. And so when we call for action and ask for your help, we certainly do appreciate anything you can do with our local delegation, letting them know that counties are in fact getting hit hard, and we're going to actually be getting hit harder. And so we certainly do appreciate any support you can give us with that fight. So with that, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. We're just going to turn it over to Christina. Christina comes to us from the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, or KDEM. And Christina, like I said, I listened to her presentation last week, and she does a fantastic job. And with that, Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you. So thank you again for joining us, and welcome to the Kansas Association of Counties.
Well, thank you for asking me to do this. I am always appreciative when I can talk to a whole group of people as opposed to having to talk to everyone individually, because as it is, I'm on the phone a good deal of the day. So to be able to get a group of folks and get some questions answered is a wonderful opportunity for me. So just as a little bit of background, for those of you who do not know, although most counties in Kansas have dealt with a public assistance disaster in the past, public assistance is, it sounds as if it's an approach to the public, but it really is about public infrastructure as a general rule. So counties, cities, townships, all kinds of governmental entities. Like, for instance, I found out that Kansas has hospital districts, which I didn't know until this event. Any kind of a governmental entity is automatically an eligible applicant for public assistance. And then in the case of, even in past disasters, some private nonprofit entities are considered eligible. I'm not going to talk about those too much today, although if you have questions regarding them, you can always get in touch with me, but I assume that there aren't too many of those folks on the phone here today. If we do talk about private nonprofits, it will only be an opportunity for you to, if you have questions, you might be able to answer. For instance, most of the private nonprofits that are eligible for direct assistance from PA are hospitals, clinics, long-term care facilities, nursing homes, that sort of thing. And again, all of this is very specifically tied to direct response to COVID-19. So even for counties and cities, all of the response that you're doing has to be directly related to response to COVID-19. I know I've talked to several of the county emergency managers in the past. So if you guys are back on the phone again, if you have other questions that have come up since I talked to you all last, or in the case of folks that were not on those original calls, I'd be happy to field questions when we get all done. So this particular FEMA disaster is highly unusual, as you probably already have figured out. Number one, it is a Category B disaster only, and that means Category B is for emergency protective measures. So there's not going to be any permanent work involved in any kind of a reimbursement for this disaster. Additionally, debris removal is also not eligible for this disaster, except for medical waste, which is included in the emergency protective measures in Cat B. So everything that we're going to be doing on this disaster is different than what we've done in the past. Generally, a public assistance disaster revolves around damages, damage assessments, damage inventories, and how we get those damages fixed for you. Well, in this disaster, there are no damages, and so everything is turned upside down. FEMA's web-based system, their portal, was not set up to handle a pandemic. It was set up to handle road damage and building damage and culverts being washed out and, you know, that sort of thing. So they are very quickly, and as quickly as I think probably is humanly possible, trying to make adjustments and adaptations to help make that portal system work for this disaster. With that being said, they also are doing a variety of things to the portal to make it easier. FEMA has, you know, as far as I can tell, never had a nationwide, all 50 states, every county in every state disaster. Most often our public assistance disasters are regional. So they are struggling, and I think they're going to continue to struggle with just the massive quantities of applicants and projects that are going to be involved in this. And we at KDEM are doing the best that we can do to help mitigate that, help you guys get projects turned in, and identify things that can be eligible for public assistance. So as in previous disasters, we are continuing to work directly with applicants in an attempt to try to get things smoothed out and streamlined, perhaps. In this particular disaster, for the first time ever, FEMA has set up an opportunity for governmental agencies to go directly to the portal. If you do not already have an account in the portal, which you would have if you had dealt with any of the last 3, for instance, flooding events in Kansas, you'd already have an account set up and you would already have used it. For those who have not been in the previous disasters, the last 3 disasters, the portal will allow you to go directly there, set up your own account, and enter your own request for public assistance. That is unprecedented. And then as time goes along, FEMA is adding some additional features to help you actually do some of your own projects yourself. With that being said, that's a choice that you can make. But if you would prefer to have the help of some of my project managers, that is absolutely available to you. We're here to try to make this as easy as we can. I have hired some additional folks to come in and work this disaster and left the previous people that you may have worked with. They are still working those flooding disasters. We weren't done with them. We've still got lots of people to address to try to get some money back into the coffers for those flooding damages. And I want that disaster concluded almost as much as y'all do. So those folks are still working that. Since this particular disaster requires almost no public assistance experience, because all of this is brand new and in different areas than we've ever worked with, bringing in some new folks to help was not a problem, because they don't know any less than I do at this point. And with that being said, I will tell you that right now, everything in this PA process is very fluid still. FEMA is still making policy. They're still answering questions. They're answering questions they never thought they were going to be asked. And so are we, quite frankly, just because of the nature of the disaster. So what I tell you today at 2:15 is accurate today at 2:15, but by tomorrow at 2:15, they may have changed that. We are trying really hard to keep up with all this information and to try to keep everybody informed about what's going on. At this point in time, most of the expenses that y'all have related to this disaster are going to be, I assume, for PPE, personal protective equipment, and any other measures that you may or have or are considering taking to protect the safety and health of the public. If you're not already, you should be keeping track of those costs so that when we get ready to actually submit those projects, you've already got your documentation all put together and we can do this much quicker. It's easier to keep track of it. I know this for a fact. It's easier to keep track of it as you go rather than try to go back 2 months from now and try to pick up everything that you may have spent. So keep a little log, keep a shoebox on your desk for receipts, you know, however best it works for you. If you've got a good accounting system and you can code these things to a specific account, that works extremely well. But there are lots of options for that. I just highly recommend that you keep track of it as you go. If you have any questions as to whether or not it will be eligible, my recommendation is that you keep track of it. We'll submit it and we'll find out if it's eligible, because at this point, there are so many variables to this that FEMA's having a hard time even keeping up with questions. As with all other public assistance disasters, there is a minimum project amount. For this particular disaster, it is $3,300. So you have to at least have that much in expenses accrued in order to apply for a public assistance grant. I think most of you are aware that there is a lot of money being made available for this event from a lot of different federal agencies. I will tell you that, as usual, FEMA is at a 75% federal cost share for any costs that are submitted for reimbursement. That is their norm. Again, that could change. Rumor has it that they may be thinking about doing that, but it hasn't happened yet. I will certainly let everyone know if it does, but at this point, FEMA's cost share is still at 75%. Under normal circumstances, and in the past, the state of Kansas has kicked in an additional 10%. I have not heard that they are not going to do that, but I also have not heard that they are going to do that. So in an effort not to count chickens before they're hatched, I just want you to be aware that, as far as I know, they will match it at 10% as they have in the past, but that has not been confirmed. So we are in the midst of this nationwide event that everyone is trying to figure out how to deal with. I will tell you that most of the other money that is available from Health and Human Services, from the CDC, from the Veterans Affairs, from, there's money available, the USDA, there's money available from a lot of different sources. Most of them are a 100% grant type of disbursement. And while PA is considered a grant, it is not the typical grant in that you ask for or you are awarded $40,000 and you go off and do good things. Generally, the PA grant is a reimbursement program for expenses that you've already paid. Public assistance does have the ability to do what FEMA calls an expedited funding, which means that we can work with you to get you some money right off the bat, much quicker probably than normal, but only up to 50% of your 75%. And then at some later point, we'll go in and reconcile and pay out the balance. Right now, I am recommending that until I hear otherwise, that FEMA's gotten so backed up that they cannot make payments quickly enough, we're recommending that folks just go ahead and we'll do a regular project worksheet, that's what we used to call it, and get your costs in the system. I was told by FEMA today that they are looking about a 7 to 10 day turnaround time. Pardon my being a bit jaded, but we'll find out. If that's the case, then there really is no reason to go through the expedited funding, but it is available if you are in dire need of getting some funding in there. For-profit entities, as you probably know, so if you get questions about this, for-profit entities are not eligible for any reason. Not only has FEMA set up to where you can go in and enter your own requests for public assistance, your own RPAs, and set up your own account. They also have set up a streamlined template, which works very much like a TurboTax application. Some questions are asked, and as you answer those questions, it kind of leads you through this form to get the information that they need. It is an issue for most governmental entities, but there are two things that FEMA will not pay for. One of them is lost revenue, and the other one is extra operating expenses. So, for instance, there are some hospitals in Kansas that their biggest problem right now is that they have lost revenue because they're not doing elective surgeries, they're not doing testing, their labs are not being used. All of those things FEMA does not pay for. My understanding is that Health and Human Services has money available for that, but it is not available through public assistance. It is not an eligible cost. The same thing with extra operating expenses. As of today, for example, school districts that have spent money to facilitate online learning, those costs are not eligible under public assistance because FEMA considers that to be additional operating expenses. And the reason they consider it that way is because it is not a direct response to the virus. We don't have to agree, and we don't. FEMA and I do not agree on that, but at this time, that's what the ruling is. As I'm sure you're aware, as things get noticed on a political basis, decisions get changed. So that could change, but right now, the costs associated with getting kids in some kind of online learning classes are not eligible for public assistance. There is money through the Department of Education, and there is money through the Department of, what's the other one? Can't think right now, to help with those. But what will be eligible, I believe, for schools and other entities like that will be sanitizing or disinfecting costs, and also the purchase of PPE. So those kinds of things at this point are considered to be eligible for public assistance. Keeping track of your receipts is going to be critical. In some cases, this is going to be a little bit easier to deal with in some of our past, our damaged disasters. They're a lot more complicated. You know, you need pictures, you need all kinds of other information. In this case, a lot of this is going to be simply turning in receipts for PPE or for disinfecting or whatever. So in some cases, the paperwork itself may be a little simpler. However, there may be a whole lot more of it. So I have done a couple, well, I've done more than that. I've done 6 or 8 individual county applicant briefings that the county emergency managers called all of their applicants together, and we did another briefing exactly like what I'm doing today. If any of you are interested in that for your own individual counties, I'd be more than happy to do that. I will tell you that on KDEM's website, under public assistance, we have some forms, the actual request for public assistance. There's some instructional forms there. There's some FEMA fact sheets about things that are eligible. And there also is a slide set there that is a typical applicant briefing for this particular event. So if you've got folks that you'd like to refer to those things are all posted there. Also, you will have my email address and my phone number. You can reach me at any time for questions about this. But I will tell you that one of the biggest issues right now that FEMA is facing is that they have a rule that they will not duplicate fund anything. For a normal disaster, that means if you have insurance that covers the damages, then they're not going to also pay you. In this case, duplicate funding refers to other federal money that's available. And so they are being somewhat cautious, and we're going to have to do some deeper digging probably at some point down the road. But I would encourage you to try to keep track of what you have received money for from other agencies, and just make sure you don't apply to FEMA for those, because there will be a reckoning to make sure that you also did not receive money from HHS and then apply to FEMA for the same the same products. At this point in time, we're still not sure how all of this is going to wash out. And again, you know, none of us have ever been in a situation like this. So we're just kind of working through this as best we can and dealing with as many of the situations as are possible. I would highly encourage you to go ahead and get a request for public assistance filled out and either sent to KDMPA in the instructions that are on the website. It has an email address that you can mail your forms to. It also has my contact information there, as well as Becky Middendorf is my right hand. She's my right hand everything. So you can reach us for those. Even if you're not sure if you're going to have enough to meet the $3,300 minimum project, I still highly recommend that you put in an application. Right now, there is no deadline for getting those in. Under normal circumstances, we have a 30-day deadline to get those in following a declaration. FEMA at this point has indefinitely postponed that because they know this is going to be an ongoing thing. They also know that because it's ongoing, while you may have invoices that you'd like to submit right now for PPE, 6 months down the road or 3 months down the road, you may need to order more, and in which case then they're going to allow us to amend that original project so that we can continue to add to it as time goes along. And finally, I think the last thing that I haven't talked about yet is procurement rules. As many of you may have found out the hard way, FEMA is always very particular about procurement rules. You know, generally requiring that you bid everything out, that you try to include women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, and a lot of that information is still true. However, they have relaxed to a certain extent some of the procurement rules to answer this shortage of PPE that's out there, and to answer the fact that the costs may not be what we could have got them. You know, we could have gotten masks in October a whole lot cheaper than we can get them now. But that procurement ruling is also on the KDM website. I can also provide them to you guys at the Kansas Association of Counties if you want to put all that stuff on your website as well, so that those are easily accessible. But I hope I haven't forgotten anything, but I probably filled your heads with enough stuff to keep you from sleeping for a week anyway. So, well, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, let me jump in, Christina. We have to be careful because we've got elected officials on the line, so we can't have a whole lot of discussion because of the Open Meetings Act and all that stuff. But there are a few questions that I have, and so are the PPE, the gloves, the gowns, the mask, are those considered operating costs when it comes to expenditures for FEMA PA program?
I can't explain to you why not, but no, they are not.
Okay.
PPE is an eligible expense, and even like for a county hospital, for instance, you know, common sense would say, well, we have to buy those anyway. Now we're having to buy more, so isn't that an additional operating expense? But that's not what's happening. So PPE is absolutely eligible. And, you know, I'm one of those folks that you know, the logic part, I always go, really? And then I forget that it's, you know, that it's not necessarily has to be logical.
Now then also when I was on with you in Cowley County, you had done a really nice job of comparing wages and salaries and working from home. I know you had used the analogy of you getting a computer and your husband getting a computer, but then also on top of that, if you don't mind, what about the wages for employees preparing or handing out meals to students? Would those be eligible expenditures?
Okay, well, and help me because I'll probably forget. By the time I answer the first one, I'll forget what the second one was. So
okay, I'm here. I won't leave you. I won't leave you hanging.
So everything that I am being told by FEMA is really related to the question, is it a direct response to protect the health and safety of the public? So, for instance, I am working from home. I work for the Kansas Division of Emergency Management. If they had purchased this laptop for me to work at home, it would be considered eligible because I am only working on this disaster. 24/7, you know. There hasn't been anything else on my plate since this whole thing started. So it is a direct response to COVID. My husband is also working at home, and if his office had to buy him a computer, it would not be considered eligible because he is doing his regular job, not responding to COVID-19. So his laptop would not be considered eligible, an eligible expense. So that's the way you kind of have to talk your way through it. Is, you know, how are we dealing with that? Now, as far as wages are concerned, wages for your full-time regular people, okay, are not eligible unless they are working overtime directly on the response to COVID, and then overtime is eligible, okay? So if you've got folks that are maybe working COVID, for instance, county emergency managers and so forth, they're probably like me. They're working COVID 24/7 plus a whole bunch of overtime. That overtime is eligible because FEMA looks at it as regular time is budgeted by the county. The county already has that figured, or the city or whatever, already has that figured into their budget. So FEMA doesn't need to reimburse that. You guys have already taken that into account. However, overtime you're not prepared to deal with, so that's why they will pay overtime for regular employees, not regular time. If you have folks that you have hired part-time or temporary to deal with the COVID response, both their regular time and their overtime is considered eligible because they weren't budgeted to do that. And so you can apply for both their regular time and overtime.
So what about the health department tracking down COVID-19 exposure cases? So if we have contact tracing, are those types of expenditures, because that's directly related to COVID-19, that would be considered an eligible expense?
It is. And,
okay.
And I have to back up just a little bit about overtime. Okay. Any of you that you know, most agencies are don't pay overtime anymore. Okay, you get comp time. Some agencies do pay overtime, but if you're getting comp time, that does not count. That is not eligible because you didn't exactly spend the money. Okay, so FEMA cannot reimburse you for comp time that you received, but in some cases, especially during emergency situations, a county's policy will say, you know, based on this trigger, based on that trigger, at a certain point in time, we're going to start paying overtime. As long as that trigger was set up prior to the disaster. Okay, so it has to be a pre-emergency requirement. In other words, right in the middle of this, you can't change your policy and start paying overtime. But if you already had it in your policy that under certain circumstances you would pay overtime, and as long as it is not tied to, in other words, if the language doesn't say, well, as long as it's a federal declaration, we can get FEMA money, we'll pay you overtime, as long as it doesn't say that. So there are some caveats to the overtime thing. But, you know, if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer them or ask higher up the chain and find out.
Yeah, because you had that here again at the Cowley County presentation, you had offered another example, and it goes right along with what you're saying. There was a community where the sanitation workers were having to work overtime to unplug the drains because of all the stuff being flushed down. If you want to share that story and why that's not eligible eligible for overtime.
You have a really good memory. Either that or you were taking notes, and
I just remember
don't.
things.
So we have an applicant that, because of folks flushing those Clorox wipes down the toilet, that their water lines were all backed up, and they were trying to get them unclogged, and they were trying to keep them from overflowing into folks' homes. They had some water employees that were sitting there watching a boiling pot, I guess. Those expenses for overtime are not going to be eligible, nor will their repairs to their water line. And yes, the argument could be made that, well, if it wasn't for COVID and everybody was using Clorox wipes, then none of this would have happened. But unfortunately, it is not a direct response to the event, and neither is the overtime. It is, yes, in their case, it was an emergency protective measure so that they didn't have sewage backing up into people's homes, but it is not related to COVID as far as FEMA is concerned.
Okay. Is there a statute that allows you to pay your emergency manager overtime during a disaster, even if there are exempt employee? Is there something that can be done there?
Not that I'm aware of. In most cases, that is absolutely a policy that a county or city would develop. I know there are some who do. So they obviously have, because I've had this conversation with some other people going, well, we're getting paid overtime now. Normally we don't, but because it's a disaster and they realize that overtime is required, then they're willing to pay it. So I'm not aware of it. That doesn't mean there isn't one, but.
Okay. Now, going back to the cleaning supply stuff, what about cleaning supplies and sanitizing supplies and fogging devices and things like that can be purchased or rented, or cleaning companies that have a contract to come in and clean public spaces, restrooms, showers, places like that? Are issues like that covered by the FEMA PA program?
And the answer to that is yes. Again, with a caveat, because I have not yet seen in actual practice what's going to happen when that kind of expense continues. To me, since this is a continuing event, it should all continue to be covered. Once the schools get back open, for instance, they're going to have to be disinfected on a somewhat regular basis. I do know that I have asked the question, and it has not been answered yet by FEMA, about custodial staff overtime for this very reason. Because to me, that is a direct response to the event, but I'm waiting for an answer from FEMA. I always prefer to under promise and over perform. So I'd rather tell you no right now and then surprise, it got covered. But yes, cleaning and disinfecting is part of what is covered under this. It does show that in one of the fact sheets that's on the KDEM website. So yeah.
Now, what about applications? When would you like an application, given the fact that the deadline is unknown?
The safest thing is to just go ahead and get them turned in. If it turns out that a county or a city actually hasn't spent $3,300, all we've got to do is withdraw you, and that does not affect any future disasters that you might be involved in. So, you don't get a black mark on your scorecard for withdrawing. But my feeling is it's easier to do that than it is to try to request special permission if FEMA has closed the incident period and then all of a sudden you realize you don't have an application in. So The best thing to do is just go ahead and get it in, and we'll deal with it as time goes along.
Okay. And I know you've talked a little bit about, and you've done a great job of dissecting the different roles and things that people have in this battle. What about the folks that are standing outside the doors, taking people's temperatures and monitoring those folks, the public that's coming in, that type of stuff? Would their time and energy be considered FEMA PA reimbursable?
I think the answer to that is probably yes, for the simple reason that that this is not something that you would normally do.
Right.
And it is in an attempt to protect the health and safety of the public. So my inclination would be to say that is, because those certainly are not budgeted positions that you have. Even if you have people that are, just temporarily out there doing it, or whatever, my inclination would be yes. So be sure and keep track of those hours. One of the jobs that KDEM has is to act as a go-between between the applicants, which are counties and cities and so forth, to act as a go-between them and FEMA. That's what my people do. My project managers that are going to be involved in helping all of this. One of the things that we try to do, because we live in Kansas and stay in Kansas, is that we try to make sure that Kansas gets the maximum amount that they can get for these kinds of reimbursements. So there's a lot of times when we can go to bat and say, look, guys, this is what you said, and this is what they did, and, let's talk about this. And then, we can go through that process. And a lot of times FEMA will work with us on that because they're used to us being right there saying, hold up.
Oh.
Okay.
Yep. And so what about all of the, with the counties, the courthouses and the other public spaces starting to reopen? What about some of the items that counties may be needing to purchase to create dividers, or maybe, new furniture or something like that to allow fewer people to be in smaller spaces during waiting times? And or employees who maybe need to have new desks or new chairs because of the closeness concerns, and in order to spread them out, they need to buy new furniture or things like that. Would something like that be considered reimbursable? Some of those harder goods.
Yeah. So I've already asked the question. This came up several weeks ago about voting places, for example, where they've got folks sitting at the table.
Right.
And so the question came up, what about basically they're a sneeze guard like you'd see at a salad bar, but some kind of a plexiglass, and the answer was yes, that would be covered, because again, it is an attempt to protect the health and safety of the workers. My fear is, and I have not run this past FEMA, but my fear is that because permanent work is not eligible under this disaster, that it gets a little iffy if you're doing a lot of like floor to ceiling partitions, that kind of thing. I think would be iffy. Some temporary partitions might be. Again, I'd rather err on the side of caution here. But I talked to somebody the other day who wanted to put up floor to ceiling plexiglass partitions throughout the entire office, and they had basically an open area, and so they're basically building rooms.
Yes.
And that to me is not what this is all about. If you want to buy, if the courthouses or the county or whatever wants to buy some PPE for their people, absolutely, that will be considered part of the eligible funding. It's just one of those, it depends on how far you take it. At this point, anything that you do to protect the health and safety of your employees as well as the public should be eligible. But as long as everybody's a little bit rational about it, we'll probably be okay.
Awesome. Now, what about the district court? Would district court go through the state or through the county for reimbursement for extra staff and extra people and or supplies to ensure that courts is safe?
I'm glad you asked, because that's another thing that we haven't really talked about. There are counties in Kansas where everything in the county is under one federal employer's identification number under one FEIN. So the Sheriff's Department, the Health Department, the Noxious Weed Department all uses the same federal ID number and DUNS number. There are other counties in Kansas where all of those entities are considered separate. They each have their own FEIN number. So in that case, the Health Department would be an applicant. The Sheriff's Department would be an applicant. So you just have to go back and look and see how your county is set up and whether or not they all use the same. If everyone uses the same FEIN number, then there's just one applicant for the county, and then all the others can submit their costs under that umbrella. But if everybody's got their own, then they need to submit on their own. So that was the first part of, that's what reminded me, but that really wasn't your question. So do you remember what your question was?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, no, you answered, would the district court go through the state or through the county for reimbursement? And you talked about that.
District court depends on how it's set up.
Okay.
It was the district court question that I forgot. And I know that I did have a district court question come in about computers and so forth for folks that they were having work at home. They were one of the first ones that asked, and that was how we came, I got the answer from FEMA about, if they're not working on COVID, then those are considered additional operating expenses and would not be considered covered under this thing. So I'm not sure. I don't know enough about district courts to know how how that's all set up.
Okay.
But it depends on whether they have their own FEIN number or not.
Okay. Okay. All righty. Well, Christina, you certainly win the prize for Stump the Expert. We could not stump you today, so.
Yeah, I could talk about this all day long.
Yes, you could, and you do an amazing job. You certainly did. You under-promised and over-delivered like you hoped you would do. So thank you again so much for you spending the past 45 minutes with us. And we had about 30 participants on. And I think you got a lot of great information. And so we can't thank you enough.
Don't hesitate to call if you've got a question. If I don't know, I'll find out.
Okay. And tell me again,
right.
What's the website that people need to go to so that they can fill out the application if they have not already done so?
Yeah, if they just Google, and I can send you the website address, but if they just Google the Kansas Division of Emergency Management, it will take them to that site.
Okay.
And under Kansas Division of Emergency Management, there is a tab for public assistance, and that's where we have everything posted there.
Okay, and we'll put a link on our KAC website as well. I know Kim's listening, so she'll do that. Yes, so.
I'll send it over to you.
Okay, and so folks, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, to Kim Qualls, Jay Hall, or Christina, and we'll definitely try to get some of your questions answered. And please, if you think about it, send us your numbers. We certainly do want to track how many dollars you're spending on this battle so that we can go to the governor and hopefully get some of that CARES Act money and create the case that it's very important that counties get reimbursed for the expenditures that they're incurring. So please be on the lookout for that.
Well, and if I might add in
yes.
here too, right at this point, there are a lot of folks out there that have not yet spent a great deal of money.
Right.
They anticipate doing so. And so we're kind of like you. That kind of information would be really helpful because we could prioritize if you've already spent $2 million in PPE. Let us hear from you because we can get that turned in right now.
Right.
So those are the kind of things that are helpful to us in prioritizing who's already spent money, but who's about to. So
that sounds great.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And Chip, you turned your camera back on. Is there anything you want to say before we leave? Nope. Okay. With that, folks, then again, I thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to working with you again, and stay in touch and let us know if you need anything from myself or the rest of the KAC staff. So have a great rest of the day and be safe and be healthy. So thank you.
Thank you.